Telewizja Repubblica, w studio gość Matthew Tyrmand. Ostatnie notatki dokonuje, wpisuje do swojego notatnika. Matthew, welcome to New Poland. I think we have a kingdom here. At least that's what I can read in Politico. The King of Poland is a title of editorial of one of the authors. Zanim zaczniemy, materiały z zagranicznej prasy w krótkim skrócie telewizji Repubblica.
Przyjaciele Orbana wygrali polskie wybory.
W Europie będzie dwoje Węgier.
Wraz z wczorajszym głosowaniem Polska zbliża się szybkim krokiem ku ksenofobicznej polityce Orbana na Węgrzech.
Wyborcy w najważniejszym kraju członkowskim Unii Europejskiej i NATO na wschodzie dokonali bardzo ostrego, bezkompromisowego wyboru. Więcej narodu i mniej Europy. Tradycje narodowe ponad wszystkim. Wygrywa partia antyeuropejska. Absolutna większość dla populistów.
Niedzielne wybory parlamentarne w Polsce wywracają do góry nogami jedną z najbardziej stabilnych scen politycznych w Europie.
Wydaje się, że kraj był zmęczony rządami liberalnej, centroprawicowej Platformy Obywatelskiej i opowiedział się za powrotem do władzy Prawa i Sprawiedliwości Jarosława Kaczyńskiego, nacjonalistycznego weterana. Nacjonaliści na drodze do odzyskania władzy w Polsce.
Polska przeżyła polityczne trzęsienie ziemi, którego siłę trudno jeszcze obecnie określić, podobnie jak zasięg fali uderzeniowej.
Wygląda na to, że po raz pierwszy w historii postkomunistycznej Polski żadna z lewicowych lub socjaldemokratycznych partii w kraju nie przekroczyła progu, by zdobyć mandaty w parlamencie.
PiS jest ugrupowaniem silnie pronatowskim, ale również bardziej sceptycznym wobec Unii Europejskiej. Partia ta przeciwna jest przyjęciu euro i jest mocno antyimigracyjna.
Nationalism, 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 nationalism. Why is that, and are we a kingdom?
Well, a lot of headlines, a lot of nationalist headlines. I think the one you were showing was the Politico piece by Jan Chensky, and
titled "The King of Poland."
The King of Poland, and there wasn't a lot of news in there. There was a lot of editorializing. It read like one big Jan Tomasz Gross style editorial of the evils of peace and how they will bring Poland back to darker times of vengeance. Not a lot about the mandate from the people that was so overwhelming against the incumbents who were so obviously corrupt. There was not a lot of mention in any of the Western press about the corruption. You saw a lot of, quote-unquote, fed-up Poles, fed up with Europe. Okay, that's accurate. But then that followed with a lot of editorializing about Euroscepticism and how these people are going to destroy the economy and bring a sort of more hostile politics both to Poland and to Europe. And I certainly don't think that's the case. This is democracy. The people have spoken.
Well, in a couple of the titles and the headlines that we heard and saw, there is Platforma Obywatelska, but it's not obvious that PO party lost because of the overwhelming corruption. Why is that?
No, I actually think the real... already we saw in the presidentials, and we saw in the last year or so after Affair Tashmova, after the work that Vopros did to actually report something that pulled back the curtains on the corruption, sentiment started to shift. But it still was the spread in this race between PiS and PO, I think, was a lot more narrow until the last 3 to 5 months when we, as Europeans here, saw a major crisis. And this crisis was where a stark dichotomy was posed between those who don't believe in more Europe, who don't believe in open borders, peace, and this resonated with the grassroots, and PO, who has gradually aligned themselves more and more to be a vassal of Brussels. And for them to say, yes, we will do whatever Brussels says, despite the unpopularity of an initiative like opening the borders to those who people here view as invaders, somewhat justifiably, looking empirically at what's gone on in Scandinavia and France and the Netherlands and Belgium. It's a very common sense, rational approach. They have, in the Western press, been pilloried for this.
Is it the same approach that the Western press, we saw the same approach regarding Hungary with Viktor Orban? A couple of times Viktor Orban in the same headlines.
Orban has certainly led on this issue. Hungary being on the periphery and having to deal with this issue, having that much more impact to Hungary. I think Viktor Orban's been a leader on this issue. I'm not a fan of Orban. It generally bothers me when the Polish right holds up Viktor Orban as a emulating or an emulatable character for Polish leadership.
Why is that?
I personally believe that Orban is so illiberal, and he's coined it proudly, this illiberal democracy. I don't believe in illiberal democracy. I believe in classical liberal ideals of more freedom, not less, that he's been hostile to a free press there. He's been hostile to a judiciary that predated him, and he stacked the benches. He's nationalized multiple industries and been way too protectionist. These are things that have not helped the Hungarian economy and will continue to not help the Hungarian economy. So I don't think Poland should emulate Orban in these ways, but I do think that the leadership he's shown in standing up to Brussels with a forced mandate of an incursion of refugees, I think that Poland sees the same thing that Hungary sees, and it makes a lot of sense.
You went through most of the Western media after the election. What do you think about this whole reception of the election result?
I saw a few things that were surprising, a few things that weren't surprising. Now, I thought the worst coverage was predictably out of the FT, Henry Foy, who really tried to, in word choice, in English word choice, tried to inject words that have negative connotations that have been co-opted, words we've talked about in the past, like nationalist, and xenophobic. He did not speak about what actually catalyzed this sea change in support for peace. Same thing in The Economist. The worst was The Guardian, though. I mean, The Guardian, you don't expect much from The Guardian. It's like a cartoon tabloid. But what The Guardian went through is creating almost like an Iranian fascist state, if you read between the lines. You didn't have to read between the lines that deeply. They interviewed, Alex Duval-Smith interviewed one person, a 22-year-old, who said they're going to turn this country into Greece and I'm leaving. So, I mean, that's not an excellent sample on polling of opinion.
But it shows something that is significant somehow. We have reference to Hungary with Viktor Orban, who is not a favorite politician of the European politicians, or elites, let's put it this way. And Syriza, which is totally different party than PIS, which is not a favorite party of European elites as well. Are we going to be placed between Syriza, Fidesz,
I don't think so.
and PIS?
I don't think so. I think that there is not that fine a line as this Western media and these academic elites would suggest in the line between fascism and nationalism, or nationalism and fascism. They say nationalism is fascism, and certainly there are some fascist components rising in Europe, but the nationalism that we've seen out of peace, and a lot of Poles, the patriotism that we've seen in trying to protect the Polish nation and the Polish currency even, which is a reflection of Polish economic values, I think is not fascist at all. I think it's very democratic.
Well, there is a difference between nationalism and patriotism. There is not too many words. There are not too many words in Politico or other articles that we are talking about. They are not mentioning patriotism. They are mentioning nationalism.
Yes.
Why is that?
But I see, well, they view them, again, the same. So patriotism and nationalism are so similar because if you believe in those things, if you believe in the sovereign cultural identity of each nation state, then you are undermining more Europe, the EU project, the utopia, the socialist utopia that they want to build more than anything. It's been designed in the academy, and that's why it's failing, especially economically. And they believe more Europe is the answer. So when you have these forces within a country that want to protect their own identity, their own economy, their own decision-making capacity that's endowed by their people, it gives them legitimacy, then that is patriotic and that's nationalistic. And I don't think that's a bad conflation. The bad conflation is when they say these things are fascist, which I see the nationalism and the patriotism that are very related here as very, very, very democratic. We just won an overwhelming mandate in an election, despite the propaganda wings of the incumbent non-nationalistic parties, the Eurocentric parties, PO, and some of the leftist parties, and the media being so sympathetic to them, they still, even with that, the mandate was there from the people.
Well, for the European writers or for the European elites, there is a word Nazi, which is related to the Germany from the Second World War, and nationalism, which is a shorter version and a shortcut of the same phrase. But you were surprised positively in a couple of
the New York Times was very even-handed. Looked like a staff writer who I wasn't familiar with no axe to grind, and he reported both the math as well as the cross cross currents of sentiment, which I thought was very, very positive. But the biggest surprise to me on a sort of a positive basis was the Telegraph. One Charles Crawford, who I'm familiar with because he was the former UK ambassador to Poland, who was very friendly with Sikorski, so much so that he was being paid by the state treasury in previous years to proofread Sikorski's speeches, a number well in excess of the market rate. I think it aggregated out to about 400,000 zloty to go over these 2- and 3-page speeches. You know, Sikorski speaks English, Applebaum speaks English. And in January, I wrote about this after Verprost covered it, and that's when Sikorski and Gertic, as Sikorski's proxy, said that he was going to sue me for hate speech for calling out this lack of procurement, rational procurement. No, they have not, unfortunately. I guess they did not want to draw attention to these really ugly actions. But Charles Crawford, to his credit, he did the most nuanced analysis of peace that I've seen in the Polish or the Western media. He discussed the history of peace, the mentality of the people, and he did it in a very even-handed way. He did not make Jarosław Kaczynski look like the cult of personality that the rest of the West did. He did not make the people around him look like pawns in a chess game that's being maneuvered by Jarosław Kaczynski. He did a very in-depth analysis of the social fabric of this country, and my hat's off to him. Now, it wasn't perfect. He did not mention PO and why they lost their mandate. He did not mention any of the corruption that circled PO, but he did mention that PSL had some scandals around them, so I thought that was a more constructing the news through omission by not putting in PO, which is sort of the main part of the story here, into the story, because he does have personal connections to these people.
Any other positive examples?
Yeah. Well, something that I found personally quite positive was that I think I read about a dozen stories, mostly in the West, also some in Polish media, but in the West, I did not see Petru mentioned once. I saw parties that didn't get mandates, like the left, mentioned multiple times. I saw PSL mentioned as sort of a legacy party that retained. Now, Nowoczesna got a higher vote count than PSL, but I guess the market has priced in that Petru is so inconsequential and such a default philosophical and actual shill of PO that he's not even worth mentioning.
Just a new brand of the same
company? It's a new home for old parasites, right? So, I mean, I think that's a credit to the Western press that they did not mention noise that's irrelevant, such as Petru and Nowoczesna.
So probably they understand the situation much better than we may think. Final question. What shall Poland as a country do to change the publicity of the new government in the Western media? You
know, the Western media, and I've talked to you about this both on the air and off the air, as well as I write about it here and in the U.S. The Western media is very much like the European media. It slants left, it's got a big government agenda, and there are alternative media sources, but they don't have the same penetration because they don't have generations of entrenchment as well as public money. But what Poland can do is keep doing what it's doing. It's going in the right direction, in my view. Obviously, people know my views. I think that Poland will be a lot better off with a new regime. Democracy is predicated on change and turnover, so it's a pendulum shift back and forth. So the right takes over from the left, or PO calls themselves the center-right, but the left. And this is good. This is good for democracy. This will, I know it's not perfect. There's no rainbows and unicorns, and there will be problems. I certainly will be very vocal in coming months about the economic agenda of peace, which I, at this stage of the game, do not support. I expect there to be a little bit of a modulation because there are economic liberals in peace that might have some impact, and there are some good people around. But if Poland keeps looking out for its rational self-interest, if it asserts its sovereignty and does not allow Brussels to make all of Europe look like France, then I think the West will continue to see the miracle that is Poland, an independent Poland and a post-Soviet beacon of freedom and free market growth.
Freedom beacon is one of the titles in Western media that looks differently at Polish policy. Matthew Tyrmand, thank you very much. Matthew Tyrmand był gościem Wolnych Głosów. To jest telewizja Repubblica. Dziękuję bardzo. Czekamy, aż Matthew Tyrmand nauczy się polskiego.